a just war. What Israel is doing is not a just war. There is a difference between fighting the Nazis.
So it is not a just war.
Fighting the Nazis.
It is not a just war when you fight a war against people who murder 1,500 of your civilians and take 233 of them, at last count, captive into tunnels. It is not a just war to obliterate them. Please name a just war.
Israel's been killing civilians for the past 75 years, and there was no headlines about it, and nobody said that the Palestinians were
Israel
justified.
Israel does not purposefully kill civilians. Palestinian terrorists do.
Israel has not purposefully
if Israel
killed
put down its
civilians. Are you
guns
willing
tomorrow,
to stand by that statement?
If Israel put down its guns tomorrow, there would be a second Holocaust. If the Palestinians put down their guns tomorrow, there would be a Palestinian state. I did look into this morning, and can I please get one answer before you leave, because this is an interesting conversation. Which part of Israel is occupied Palestine? There we go. There we go. There we go. So what you're calling for is the obliteration of the state of Israel, and all of this is just a cover for that. I appreciate your time.
How often do we walk into an argument already convinced we're right? Especially when the slogans sound right, the crowd agrees, and the moral framing feels safe. It happens in politics, in activism, and especially on university campuses. And nowhere is this more visible than when a group of Muslim students challenged benshapiro on a very controversial issue. What they didn't realize was that the moment they tried to defend them out loud, those ideas would collapse under their own weight.
On the sliding fence that way. Face that way. Yes. Okay.
So, Ben, your argument was predicated entirely on Hamas. But thousands of Palestinians, including hundreds of minors and children, are being held hostage by Israel without any charge, with well-documentation of abuses, including sexual abuse, which Israel's own human rights organizations have reported. Hamas did not exist for decades after Israel's creation, and they're not in the West Bank. So, if you're going to be arguing about Hamas, how can we ignore that over 200 Palestinians have been killed, including over 40 children, making it the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank before October 7th, that does not even include the killings happening now, just in 2020.
I'd like to say there is nothing unusual there. After all, it happens to him all the time. What was unfamiliar, though, was the false confidence behind it. She clearly believed she'd found the weak spot in his argument.
What justification do you have for that if Israel intends to, quote-unquote, go after Hamas, is killing many people, especially children, under the justification of Hamas? So what justification do you have of them targeting the West Bank, even if we were to buy anything you said, which honestly I'm questioning?
And at first glance, it sounds reasonable. If people are suffering, then someone must be responsible. So she runs through the usual talking points: Palestinians in prison, people killed in the West Bank, children dying, protests being shot at. The implication is obvious. If Israel is causing all this harm, then focusing on Hamas is just a distraction.
So the casualties that have been incurred in the West Bank are prior to October 7th largely. There have been many since October 7th because there have been many conflagrations between the IDF and the Palestinian Authority and Islamic Jihad members in the West Bank. There's significant violence over the course of the early part of this year. There's a breakaway group from the Palestinian Authority. It's called the Lions. The Lions were a small terrorist cell, the Lions Den. They were committing acts of terror in places ranging from Jerusalem to areas of the West Bank. And the IDF was going in and making operational decisions to kill many terrorists in these areas. There are many areas in the West Bank that have been particularly infiltrated by terrorism. That the city of Jenin would be probably the example of the place that has been most infiltrated by terror groups. It's unfortunate, but Hamas is not the only terror group in the region. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is an excellent example of another terrorist group that has wide presence in the West Bank, more so actually than Hamas. There's a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket, obviously, that fell on that Gaza hospital. The entire world then tried to blame on Israel.
Ben doesn't rush to shut her down. He does what he usually does, which is slow the whole thing down and start asking very plain questions. Because once you start mixing Gaza, the West Bank, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Israel proper into one big moral bucket, nothing makes sense anymore. That's where the conversation starts to slip for her.
Right. Okay. So if your entire argument, once again, is predicated on terror groups, what response do you have about the Great March of Return, which is a very well-documented incident where peacefully Palestinian civilians just marched to their own land that they have a right to go and return to, but they were killed, shot at, and murdered in cold blood?
What year are we talking about? Which group are we talking about? I need more specificity.
I'm talking about the Great March of Return.
I know I'm asking for more specificity because I'm unaware of all the details of what you're speaking about.
So the Great March of Return is a well-documented instance where many Palestinians, after a tweet by a Palestinian, encouraged other Palestinians to go march peacefully back to their land.
Which land is theirs? What are we talking
We're
about?
talking about occupied Palestine.
Are you talking about in proper Israel? Where are we talking about? Like which areas?
We're talking about on the borders of Palestine, and we're also talking about their.
She keeps trying to pull it back to one idea. Civilian suffering means Israel is unjustified. But Ben keeps coming back to intent. Who is actually trying to kill civilians on purpose? And who is fighting armed groups that choose to operate inside civilian areas? That distinction isn't academic, it's the difference between war and terrorism.
There is no right to return. If you're talking about in Palestine, if you're talking about the land that is inside the 67 borders, there is no right of return to Haifa, there's no right of return to Tel Aviv, there's no right of return to West Jerusalem.
So you have to remember that there are many, many, many elders who are older than the state of Israel. You have to remember that Palestine is not a Muslim land. You are equating this to a religious conflict. It's not. When Palestine, before it was occupied, you had Jews, Christians, and Muslims peacefully coexisting. Palestine is not a Muslim homeland. It's a land that existed where many people that are alive to this day are older than the state of Israel.
So are you making the argument that any population of any time, all of their descendants now have a right to go back to the place that their great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers went?
Not great-great-great-grandfather. We have grandmothers.
Okay, grandmothers, grandfathers. Is that the idea that you can walk across the lines of any sovereign state and simply claim the place that you said that you had, even though you never established property rights in, say, the Jordanian West Bank, or you abandon this place in Haifa? So your claim is that right now people get to walk across the border of a sovereign nation and simply set up shop in Haifa? This is your claim?
So so even if we were to buy what you're saying, which is obviously not true, I encourage you to Google about the Great March of Return, which was a peaceful resistance against a wrongful occupation of Palestine. Even if you were to buy.
Then comes the turning point. Ben asks a simple question that sounds harmless but never is.
Wrongful occupation. Which part of Palestine is occupied?
You're not answering my question.
I mean, I'd like you to answer mine.
Terror groups. I gave you an example of peaceful resistance.
Yes.
I'll give you an example where people were wrongfully shot at, including children, and you still can't answer about why that's justified.
So, if again,
You keep talking about Hamas and terror groups, and you gave examples of other terror groups, even though I gave you examples of civilians who marched and were shot at. But even now, a few days ago, you had Palestinian people living in Israel proper, which is occupied Palestine, who are being shot at by farmers in their gardens and in their farms. And those people are being able to get away with shooting them with total impunity. So why is it that
that's not true. Many of those people have been arrested. They're all currently sitting in Israeli jail.
The settler that just shot at a Palestinian
Have been
farmer
arrested.
was not arrested. I encourage you to look into this.
I did look into this morning. And can I please get one answer before you leave? Because this is an interesting conversation. Which part of Israel is occupied Palestine?
All of Israel?
There we go. There we go. There we go. So what you're calling for is the obliteration of the state of Israel, and all of this is just a cover for that. I appreciate your time.
And once she said that, everything changed. Because now this isn't about policy, borders, or even military conduct anymore. It's about whether Israel has a right to exist at all. Ben calls that out directly. If all of Israel is occupied, then there is no compromise position here. There's no two-state solution hiding in the background. There's just removal. This is the same moment that shows up again and again in these debates. You hear phrases like, from the river to the sea, and people insist it's about justice or equality. But when you ask them what that actually means on a map, the answer tells you everything. At this point, another student jumps in, this time a male.
Thank you, and may I first say thank you for coming to speak at the Oxford Union this evening. It's a real pleasure. I'm a theology student myself, and I was wondering, how do you reconcile your conservative political views?
Say into the microphone.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile your conservative political views with the religious values of compassion and your own Jewish faith? And your stance on the Israeli-Palestine war?
He accuses Ben of justifying the killing of civilians. He pushes back calmly because Israel is not justified in killing civilians, full stop. But trying to eliminate a terrorist group and accidentally killing civilians in the process is not the same thing as deliberately walking into homes and murdering families. If you erase that difference, then every country defending itself becomes the villain, and every terrorist group becomes a victim.
Uncompassionate to call for the overthrow of Hamas, a terrorist group in the Gaza Strip, which has been oppressing its people and stealing billions of dollars from its own people. Ismail Haniyeh is living in a 5-star hotel in Qatar while his people are living in absolute misery because of a war that he initiated by killing 1,500 people inside Israel proper and then taking 233 hostages. I don't see why that's non-compassionate. It seems to me that compassion also requires that you obliterate terrorist threats to your own population.
More Palestinians have died than Israelis, so Israel must be wrong. Ben gives a blunt comparison. More Germans died than Brits in World War II. That didn't make Britain the moral villain. Numbers alone don't decide morality. This is the point where things get even messier.
My best. Hello, Ben. It's good to see you. I've been watching you since 2015. You started my conservative journey, and here we are. I saw, unfortunately, you had to bring some pretty gruesome photos, and I have to say I hope those photos aren't real, and I have my doubts because recently you posted an AI-generated image of a charred infant corpse.
No, I didn't. That is a lie. That is untrue. It was not an AI photo. It was not an AI photo. It was distributed by the Israeli government and the Prime Minister of Israel. It was verified by the United States government. That fake community note that said that it was an AI-generated photo was in fact taken down by Twitter because it was a fake community note. That is unfortunately not an AI-generated photo. I wish it were. It was a baby obliterated beyond recognition because it had been burned to death.
So is it the word of the IDF in Israel versus the word of
No, actually, it's the photo.
He's accused of sharing fake images. AI-generated photos. Propaganda. Ben doesn't dodge it. And even after he explains where the images came from, how they were verified, and even admitting that the information space right now is chaos, they still tried to puncture holes in his argument.
Camera footage taken by GoPro cameras by Hamas terrorists as they invaded Israel proper. I don't have to take Israel's word for it. A lot of this stuff was live streamed.
So to what extent, as you're posting to social media, are you willing to make sure the information you're posting is accurate, to not exchange the truth for giving aid to Israel?
I'm certainly doing my damn best. I mean, there's a lot of information flowing around. I'm doing my best. On that one for sure, 100%. It is a lie that is an AI-generated photo. That is not true in any way, shape, or form. And it shows how it does show how we live in a very dangerous era where anybody can, I mean, this is happening on a routine basis. You're seeing, for example, some of the pictures, they're horrible pictures coming out from Gaza, and a huge number of those are, of course, absolutely real. You're also seeing people who are repurposing pictures that are taken from Syria and then saying those are happening in Gaza. So, yeah, unfortunately, there is a lot of information that's floating around that is hard to kind of lock down and verify. That picture is 100% real, unfortunately.
I sympathize with you because as AI gets more advanced, it becomes increasingly hard to discern information. So I know you bear a lot of
I mean, this is going to be a serious problem as time goes on, seriously. Like, the flow of information is going to be more and more uncertain because of that. That I agree with on a general level.
Awesome. Thank you for your time.
That moment actually matters because it's one of the few times in the exchange where someone openly admits uncertainty instead of pretending to have absolute moral clarity.
Hi. If Israel is justified in killing civilians because of the acts of terror committed by Hamas, why isn't Hamas justified in doing what it did? Because Israel is keeping 13,000 children. It has tried them in military courts. Since the establishment of Israel, 55,000 Palestinian homes have been bulldozed. So why isn't Hamas justified in doing what it did if we use your logic?
So I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to ask you a question if you don't mind. Is that all right? So so my answer is that Israel would not be justified in killing Palestinian civilians because of the actions of terrorists. Israel would be justified in attempting to kill terrorists, and civilian casualties are a cost of war. That is just a reality of life. During World War II, there were 70,000 Brits who died during the Blitz bombing, and there were 2 million Germans who died, civilians who died during World War II. And I don't see a lot of monuments in Britain because of the 2 million civilians who died in Germany. The costs of war are brutal, they're terrible, they're horrifying. There's a vast difference in moral scope between deliberately going into a civilian area and murdering everyone you can find and trying to kill a terrorist who is deliberately hiding beneath a civilian area, hiding their rockets in civilian areas, starving their own people. There is a vast difference. Okay, so now I get to ask my question, if you don't mind. So my question is, do you believe that there is a moral difference between Hamas going into, for example, Kfar Aza and murdering entire families, and Israel attempting to target terrorists and accidentally hitting civilians.
Israel is effectively doing the same because Gaza is the most densely populated region in the world. There are 15,000 people per square mile.
So does Hamas get
Over
immunity
half of
because
the
they're there? So
population's
Hamas gets
children.
immunity. So
Israel has killed 3,500 children in the past 3 weeks. That's more children. That's more children than have died in conflicts around the world in each of the last 4 years.
So just to be clear, your logic is that if you're a terrorist group located in a densely populated community and you hide behind civilians, you're now immune.
At the end of it all, the students' viewpoints were reduced to dust. They weren't necessarily embarrassed or shouted down. The students themselves exposed their own position without realizing it. What started as a claim about humanitarian concern ends with a rejection of Israel's existence entirely.
Where are the children meant to go?
So you're immune. Okay. That's
Where
a
are they
violation
meant
of the
to go?
Geneva Conventions, but okay. You're now immune. Your logic is that if you're a Hamas terrorist...
Since 2005, 23 out of every 24 conflict deaths have been Palestinian. I don't see any moral equivalency there. It's clearly unjust what the IDF has been doing to the Palestinians because there's a vast disparity between the number of Palestinians being killed and the number of Israelis.
I mean, I would
The
certainly hope that
disparity
Israel is
huge.
killing more Hamas
This isn't a
members.
conflict. This isn't a conflict. This is one-sided ethnic cleansing.
So, again, I'm just asking you, if based on the numbers, more Germans died than Brits in World War II, did that mean that the British were wrong in World War II? Because they did. Many more Germans died than Brits. Based on the numbers, does that mean that Britain was wrong in World War II?
Britain wasn't bombing civilians. There's a clear difference.
You should talk to the people in Dresden, but you can't because they're dead.
There's a clear difference. I agree that war is horrible, but this is not a just war. What Israel is doing is not a just war. There is a difference between fighting the Nazis.
So it is not a just war.
Fighting the Nazis.
It is not a just war when you fight a war against people who murder 1,500 of your civilians and take 233 of them, at last count, captive into tunnels. It is not a just war to obliterate them. Please name a just war.
Israel's been killing civilians for the past 75 years, and there was no headlines about it, and nobody said that the Palestinians were
Israel
justified
does not
in
purposefully kill
retaliating.
Civilians. Palestinian terrorists do.
Israel has not purposefully
If Israel
killed
put down its
civilians. Are
guns
you willing
tomorrow,
to stand by that statement?
if Israel put down its guns tomorrow, there would be a second Holocaust. If the Palestinians put down their guns tomorrow, there would be a Palestinian state. That is the reality. And let me ask you this.
There would not be a Palestinian settlement.
I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you.
Israel has been built.
I'm going to ask you. I'm just going to ask you the last question. The same question I asked her. Which part of Palestine is occupied?
The entirety of Palestine. But
There we go.
I'm not
Thank you
calling
once
for
again.
the destruction of Jews.
I appreciate you expressing your full genocidal intent for the Jewish people living between the river
Why
and
is
the sea.
it genocide?
And that's why these moments keep going viral. Not because Ben Shapiro is clever with words, which we can all agree he obviously is, but because he has a way of forcing people to finish their own arguments. And once that happens, the audience doesn't need a winner declared. More often than not, they can see it for themselves. If you found Ben Shapiro's points enlightening, kindly hit like, subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below.